How's it going, everybody? I'm so glad you're here, and today we're going to be talking about Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning, directed by Christopher McQuarrie, and starring Tom Cruise, Haley Atwell, Ving Rhames, and Simon Pegg. Ethan Hunt and the IMF team continue their search for the terrifying AI known as the Entity, which has infiltrated intelligence networks all over the globe, with the world's governments and a mysterious ghost from Ethan's past on their trail. Joined by new allies and armed with the means to shut the Entity down for good, Hunt is in a race against time to prevent the world as we know it from changing forever. People have been speculating about the future of this franchise for a little while now. You know, Tom Cruise is getting older. We're on the 8th film of the franchise. How many more times can they up the ante? How much more can they surprise us? How many more stories can we even come up with? And a lot of people were speculating that this would be the final film in the franchise. And is it? I don't really know. It could be, but there's not much about this film that feels final. The ending could be interpreted as the ending to the franchise, but it is left relatively open to make more if they so desire. And that leads me into some of my issues, and I'm going to do something a little bit different with this video. I'm going to talk about my problems with the film first, because there are a few. This film is not perfect, and I'm going to save my positives towards the end. There's a reason for that, and we'll get into that towards the end of this video. But getting into the issues, as I said, this film doesn't have a lot of sense of finality to it. One of the biggest issues with this franchise as a whole is overarching character development throughout the entire franchise. Characters tend to have really good development in moments in individual sections of the film, but do these developments kind of carry over into films later on in the franchise? Very rarely does that happen. This film gives us a lot of really cool development for Ethan and Grace and Benji as characters in particular, but it kind of, I don't want to say feels too little too late, but there's still a lot of open-endedness to their arcs that don't feel completed, and we don't feel as though we've reached the end for them as characters in any sense. This film is about 170 minutes long, so just shy of 3 hours. And so it's the longest Mission Impossible film by a good deal. The last film was almost the same length, but before that, the closest runtime was over 20 minutes shorter. So this is a very long film, especially for the franchise. And the first hour of it really struggles to find its footing. There's an intense over-reliance on flashbacks and callbacks to previous entries in the franchise, and they use clips from the old movies a lot in the first hour to the point where it becomes very annoying. There's a particularly ghastly supercut of all of Tom Cruise's best moments as a sort of highlight reel while he's receiving mission intel in the beginning of the film. One of the opening scenes, it's essentially just a 5-minute highlight reel of Tom Cruise running around in previous entries. And that was very weird, and it alters the pacing of the film quite a bit because there's so much. Every time the film references a previous film in the series, it feels like it has to cut back to a shot from one of the older films with a film grain LUT placed over it to remind you that it's a flashback. And at this point in the franchise, it doesn't really feel as though the filmmakers have a lot of trust in their fans to have done their homework. We're at, like I said, the 8th film of the franchise, and most people at this point have either been on the ride since the beginning and will continue to be till the end, or they got off a long time ago. So this over-reliance on flashbacks, as if the filmmakers don't trust the audience to take in this bit of exposition or this bit of history from the past, feels like a bit of a cheat. And I will say, though, as someone who had many extreme issues with Dead Reckoning's script and how it delivered exposition and how it handled things from the past, and especially going into the future, I really appreciated the tie-ins that this film did do. They all feel natural, and unlike Dead Reckoning's, we're aware of these things. We've been aware of them for years. We knew that they had a place in the universe and that they were consequential to these characters. And the way that they tie them back in, I thought worked. I don't think it will work for everybody, but it very much worked for me. Especially for the first film and the third film of the franchise, the tie-ins they do from those two, I thought were very interesting and something I would not have expected. Thematically and story-wise, the first hour also feels incredibly bloated. It doesn't quite know where to put its focus. I thought that there was some really cool subplot ideas that the film introduces in the first 20 minutes or so. There's a really cool bit of awareness that the outside world in this universe seems to have of what the IMF is trying to do, which is something we've never seen before in this franchise. The outside world is now aware of the entity. They know what it is. They know what it does. And there's really cool political sides and espionage involved in that, and the perspectives that people have in the outside world are intriguing and make sense and feel like something that could actually happen in real life, which makes it scary. But we only ever get surface level glimpses into them, and even though they are interesting, they probably could have been cut to save time, because we spend too much time on these things for them to not have any follow-through, and they don't have any follow-through. They're just shown once or twice, maybe once again in the middle, and beyond that, there's nothing. And so that was a little bit disappointing because I feel like that even if they added a bit more to the runtime to give these things more focus, it wouldn't have been a problem. And I think that the pacing would have actually been better instead of just showing us these things and not giving us a through line to their end, if that makes sense. The story is also kind of trying to pick up some of the pieces of the jumbledness of Dead Reckoning, and so we jump around a lot. The first half an hour is breakneck pace, and not very much in a good way. The build-up to the opening title and the iconic song has never felt messier in the history of this franchise. It feels very scatterbrained, very unfocused. You're not really aware of where you're supposed to be looking or where these characters are. You're kind of just following them through a bunch of rooms. You don't really know what continent they're on. You don't know what country they're on. You don't really know what they're looking for or who they're looking for or who they're talking to. You're just kind of like, okay, where is this going? And once the opening title crawl happens, you're kind of a bit more confused than you were when the film started, and it does take a bit of time after that for the film to really find its footing. There's a sequence about 40 minutes in that's going to make or break this film for a lot of people. It was something I wasn't really sure about at first, but I've grown over the past day or so to really, really appreciate it. It's something very consequential. It's something I didn't really expect to happen. It kind of happens out of nowhere, but it also is kind of a MacGuffin for this story to really find its roots, take ground, and fly sky high. And from that sequence on, the film is incredibly focused. There's over 2 hours left, but it still feels very focused, very streamlined, and very understanding of what it's trying to do from then on out. It's just whether or not everything before that is enough to keep you hooked, and I could see some people being lost by that point. The stakes in this film really do feel higher than they ever have before in this franchise. There's a lot of dread that you feel in the first half an hour or so, which I really appreciated. This is definitely the heaviest mission film. I wouldn't say that it's sad, but you definitely feel the weight of the stakes on these characters pretty immediately. I will say that this level of dread kind of dissipates a little over halfway through the film, but when the suspense really starts to kick in, but there's still that underlying fear of this might be the last one. These characters might not make it out of this. They really might not accomplish it this time. And it's the first time that I felt that way in a mission film. This film does feel different from all the others in that sense. It is weightier, it is heavier, it is darker, and I really appreciated that. There's not as much action in this film as you would expect there to be either, especially for a film that was originally a part two of a two-part film and a potential finale for the franchise. There's two particularly big set pieces in this movie, two big sequences. One's about halfway through, and then, of course, the big third act with the planes and stuff. And in between there's a couple of small action sequences, but there's a lot of espionage, there's a lot of suspense, and it has some of my favorite espionage moments in the franchise. For as many plots that there are happening in this film concurrently throughout, and how many teams there are, and who's leading what, and who's doing what, and who's focused on what, and who wants what, they all converge pretty seamlessly in the third act, and the final 45 minutes of this movie is insane. It gives the climax of Fallout a run for its money for the most intense, visceral stunts, the most thrilling moments. There's a couple moments in particular that our theater completely ate up in during our screening. People were cheering, people were clapping, people were screaming. Very, very satisfying stuff in the last hour of this movie. It's fantastic. Tom Cruise really outdoes himself with a couple of stunts in particular. There are definitely the biggest moments in this film, even if the action is not as prevalent as you may expect. Also, the action is more violent in this one than some previous entries. There's a couple moments in particular that really surprised me in a good way for how brutal they are. There's one moment in the beginning and one moment at the end that is actually pretty bloody, which is something we've not seen in a mission film in quite some time. However, I will say my one concern with the action in this film is that there's a couple moments that really toe the line into absurdity. There's some Buster Keaton, Looney Tunes-esque moments that happen in this film, and it never completely breaks that line, but I do feel concerned that if they do decide to keep the franchise going and they do try to find new ways to up the ante, they're going to kind of fall into Fast and Furious territory of absurdity, and I think the realism will start to falter, and that's when the franchise will really tank. They've kind of stretched the rubber band as far as they can here, and for their own sake, I kind of hope this is the last one. Again, I hate saying that. I love Tom Cruise. I love his stunts. I love these movies. But I think this is it. I think they've got to hang up the coat and let it be after this, because if they go any farther, we might get our first bad mission movie since number 2. This is far from that, but I'm just kind of sending out the warning now. If we get another one, I'll start to get concerned. Now, with all that being said, the reason why I talked about the issues first, and even some concurrently with my positives, I'd like to just reiterate that even though I do have major problems with this movie, throughout the entirety of the runtime, even when I was like a little mildly annoyed in the back of my head, I was really just basking in the joy and the wonder of seeing a film this massive like this on such a big and loud screen. I've seen a lot of comparisons from people that saw the film the same time as me to The Rise of Skywalker or to The Dark Knight Rises or even to something like Spider-Man 3. And while I agree on principle for some of these complaints and these comparisons about how the film is very overstuffed, it's bloated, it's egocentric, it's trying to do too many things at once. What I appreciate more about The Final Reckoning than those other films is that it still feels so unapologetically itself. There's no ulterior motives, there's no other entities, pun intended, or studios that the film is trying to please. It's not trying to cater to some super toxic fandom. It's not trying to connect some crazy cinematic universe together. It still has that really intense love of the fans and of the stunts and of the franchise, and it wants to stay true to itself, and it just has that love for cinema more than anything else at its center. And you really feel that, warts and all. And I think that people's reactions on social media to the people's reactions to seeing the film is very telling to a much greater issue that I think we're having in cinema right now anyway. A lot of people seem like they're going through the 5 stages of grief when they see a negative or mixed reaction to a film like this. A big franchise movie, for some whatever reason on social media, has to be hailed as either the best thing ever or the worst thing ever, and anything in between, people can't seem to comprehend. There's people that I know liked this movie that put out social reactions saying they did like this movie and they had problems, and people were reacting like they said it was a piece of shit. We've lost the ability to have nuanced opinions and complicated opinions on complicated movies, and it's something that's really concerning. Yes, this film has problems. Yes, this film has deep-rooted kind of egocentric flaws, but it's also just a 3-hour blockbuster espionage movie that's not a part of some insanely grand universe or trying to cater to some crazy fandom. It's kind of a unicorn in that sense. And frankly, I would rather have more movies like this that are flawed in a franchise than movies like Fallout. Is Fallout the better film in the franchise? Of course. It's, in my opinion, undeniably the best one in the franchise. But it's also easy to understand. We know why that film was great. Everybody loves that movie. We can pinpoint exactly what makes that film special and why people love it. People have intense feelings about The Final Reckoning already, and they will continue to have intense feelings about The Final Reckoning months after it comes out. People are going to love this movie, people are going to think it's okay, and people are going to hate it. This is probably going to be the most divisive one yet, and I like that far much more. I think it has so much more to teach us because of how divisive it is. Something that somebody loves about this film is also going to be something that somebody despises about this film vehemently. And I think it's going to be a really crucial moment for us as film appreciators to figure out why. Why does someone love this aspect of the film as opposed to someone hating this aspect of the film? I may sound like I'm preaching to the choir, and I may sound like I'm saying basic common sense, but we've also lost the ability to have that in today's filmmaking and cinema-going society. Like I've mentioned before, this film is deeply flawed, but even in those moments, I was just so happy to see a film that, warts and all, was so unapologetically itself and at the very least had an intense level of soul. I'm going to be giving Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning an 8 out of 10. I will be there on opening day. I will be seeing it multiple more times in the theater. Who knows? I might love it more. I might hate it more. That's cinema, baby. Thank you guys so much, as always, for watching this video. When you guys see Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning, let me know your opinions down below in the comment section. I'm sure you all will be very civil and not start any arguments at all. Like the video, share the video, subscribe to the channel, and I will see you guys in the next video. Peace out.